PM, her second in command. Now, the UK Prime Minister Theresa May called for snap elections with hopes of securing a stronger mandate to rule. But her plan backfired, ending in a hung parliament. So what does this outcome mean for Brexit? And what are the political and economic implications for us here in East Africa? I have in studio two very able panelists to help us dissect this or put it into context. Graham Shaw from the British Chamber of Commerce here in Kenya. Thank you for coming. We also have Elijah Munyi, who is a lecturer at the United States International University, Africa. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. To you, what does this vote mean for the rest of the world?
I think for most of the world, perhaps it confirms that the hard Brexit will go on. Prime Minister May expected that. I think there was a lot of opposition to her proposal on having a really hard Brexit, which means the UK would get out of the common market. Yeah. And she was hoping that she would get strengthened to pursue that. She didn't get it, but it doesn't seem that actually she's changed her mind a lot in terms of the Cabinet Secretary. David Davis is still the person to negotiate for the Brexit. And in any case, both major parties do seem to support a UK which is not part of the single market. So I think it just confirms that we are going to have that moving on.
Yeah. But with that vote, and that has been described as a big surprise and an earthquake to Theresa May, what does this say in terms of the confidence people have on her to lead the way out of the EU?
It looks like a buyer's remorse to me that the people in the UK are having second thoughts about a Brexit. So I think perhaps it was actually a confirmation that there's confusion or ambivalence about actually the decision to get out of the EU. So it does, I think in my view, it should actually strengthen May to have a more moderate position on Brexit. But I don't know if that's how she reads it.
Graham, do you agree with him that it seems like it's a biased remorse from the people there?
I think you've spoken very well and very clearly on that. As one commentator said recently, that the Conservatives lost the election but won the vote, whilst Labour won the election but lost the vote. I think it's a surprising result. I think everyone was surprised, but politics worldwide seems to be changing, with the Americans and the French elections showing. To me, I am completely in agreement with the professor. I think the Brexit negotiation will continue. It's been approved by Parliament. It's been approved by the people. Article 50 has been filed. Yeah. But the negotiations are now scheduled to start again next week, with a visit to France coming up this week. I think there will be a softening of the negotiations, but the principal areas of concern are obviously freedom of movement and the single market. But yes, I think it will go ahead.
But will it in any way stall the negotiations, make the process slower than it should be?
2 years is a long time. I think in fact the European Union are a little bit concerned about the change in the power base. But I think it will still go ahead. No, I think the 2 years is plenty of time to negotiate.
I think the interesting thing is how the UK and the EU are going to balance those two things, the common market and the free movement of people, because immigration was one of the big things that made the UK people not want to be in the EU, because they didn't have control over their migration. But the EU says, well, if you want to be in the single market, you have to have free movement of people throughout those countries which have the single market. So I think how they negotiate those two key things is key, and it doesn't seem to me that Theresa May will want to go back on not having full control over migration.
And she's made very hard stance on those issues.
Yes. So that, I think the free movement of people is really key, but my doubt is that she will go back on that. And this is why I'm saying we are still likely to see probably a total exit, meaning out of the single market, and then at the same time during these 2 years of negotiation, an FTA negotiated with the EU. Yeah.
Graham?
Interesting. I mean, we also referred a little bit about Brexit and what this will, the impact will have on the world and the world trade agreements, etc. Obviously, we're both based in Kenya, and I think it's quite important to mention that the British government are very focused on world trade and world trade agreements. Britain has sent 4 ministers to Kenya over the last year alone. So Kenya, I think, is a very important aspect of Brexit. And for myself, I'm the CEO of Wilkin, and with my Kenyan partners, we're debating this whole subject the whole time. But for Kenya, I see a positive change from the trade with the United Kingdom, because the United Kingdom and Kenya, we're the only country that our trade balance is equal. So I think it's a very, very important unity between the two countries. And I believe that Theresa May and the Brexit team will continue to focus on the key trade partners.
Speaking of Kenya, the whole world is now looking at the UK with all these political uncertainties. There's pressure mounting, of course, from the opposition for her to step down or to resign. But what does this mean for the rest of the world?
First of all, I don't think that will happen. I think the professor summed that up quite well.
He said it already.
So we would, I think the government is going to stay in place. I'm not going to guarantee they will survive 5 years, but I certainly think there is a determination to do so. As a hung parliament, and the DUP will have to negotiate very hard with the Conservative government to actually secure it. In relation to the world opinion, I think a lot of leaders and a lot of politicians will be looking at how political votes and the political change worldwide is spreading across some of the mature democracies. It's interesting, and I'm fascinated to see what will happen with the German elections, which are coming up in 2 months' time as well. But no, I think we have to move on. You can't all just stop and watch.
I think she will stay up until after the negotiations are done, and maybe 1 year. So I think we could give her 3 years. For 1 year, for people to see the effects of, to clearly understand what the UK got in the negotiations. And then perhaps by that time there'll be complaints about the deal they got, or people will be satisfied. And I think that is what will determine if the government will stay in place.
So will there be any economic implications for other countries that are in trade with the UK?
Absolutely. I mean, if we start with ourselves here, as has been mentioned, we really have to wait now, and it's very key, because if the UK gets out of the single market, many countries actually all over the world have been exporting to the EU with the UK with a single regime, with the EU export regime. If they get out, it means the UK will have its own regime, its own tariff regime, and the EU will have a separate one. They could be the same, but they'll be different. So perhaps for our French being exporters, they might have to have a packaging for the UK and a packaging separate or different in some way, or different standards for the EU. So it's got implications on costs, for instance. In terms of policy, we have an opportunity, I think, as has been mentioned. There has been talk about the UK currently imports a lot of food from other EU states, such as Spain. It's going to become more expensive because they will have to pay the customs duties, which they haven't been paying. So it could be an opportunity for countries such as ours in tropical fruits, legumes and things like that. If we do strike a good deal with the UK, because we also have to negotiate now a new trading regime with the UK. So we should be watching very closely what happens.
Graham, does that look lucrative for us?
I hope so. It's home to us all. Yes, I hope so. I do think that the United Kingdom see Kenya as being the pearl in certainly in Eastern Africa. There's a lot of history, culture, history, good and bad, and language. So yes, I see it being a positive step. I think the Kenyan economists are going to need to negotiate hard as well, and I think they'll do it, and I think it will come off. So I'm very positive.
Let's take a look at the power plays on the superpower countries, quote unquote, what would be UK's place now, even with the EU? Because already it looks like they're kind of being sidelined.
It's a good question. I don't think it's as dramatically a problem that people raise. United Kingdom is the 5th largest economy in the world. Even the likes of Germany and the United Kingdom, there's a considerable amount of trade between the two countries. I don't think that the economists, the negotiators would want to jeopardize that situation. There will be a compromise somewhere, but the relationship will remain strong. I hope that the single market negotiations work well. Freedom of people, it's a big issue, sadly, because of certain experiences that we've seen recently. So that's a very sensitive area. Not one I agree on, but that's a personal opinion.
Yes, with the recent security situation in London, Manchester, is it going to be harder when it comes to negotiating on issues to do with immigration?
I think so. I think worldwide the movement of people will be monitored much more closely. Even within Kenya, there is a lot more requirement to just monitor who's doing what where. And I think that's just a global change that we're experiencing. I don't believe that the United Kingdom will fall out of world economies. I think it's time to see what the negotiation areas are going to be, and I think the professor's experience in this area is much greater than mine. But no, I'm very positive that it'll all come good. I don't like sitting and watching.
No sitting and watching. Professor, what are some of the critical lessons we here in East Africa can learn from that vote from Thursday?
Well, I think this vote stems all the way from the question of belonging to the EU. I think this is what really precipitated this vote going back to that decision. So I think it does have lessons in terms of to what extent do we want to have regional integration taking over so that you have regional institutions such as Arusha, EAC, taking over a lot of influence on domestic policy. So I think it's a lesson in caution that we need to take into account how people feel about having influence over borders and migration particularly. We've already had some spats with Tanzania, for instance.
Already?
Yeah, on movement of people. So I think it's a very delicate balance, but I think it's not impossible. You have a lot of trade, for instance, going on in Asia, Japan, China, Korea, and those kind of places. You've got higher trade than we have in Africa, or closer to Europe levels, perhaps 40% intra-regional trade, without the kind of institutionalized regional integration that the EU has. So I think the whole question is, here in East Africa, we are very, of course, pro-regional integration. We are very proud of EAC. But I think the challenge is, moving ahead, is there a way, we want to be a bit more sure and confident that the people are in line with what the technocrats at EAC are doing, but when it comes particularly to movement of people.
Professor, I won't let you go before asking this. The youth have been very fundamental as a deciding factor in these elections, from Brexit to now this particular vote. It has been described as a youthquake. We are getting into an election as a country. What is the place of young people? Are they able to upset establishments like we have seen in other parts of the world?
Well, I don't think it parallels our situation, because I think the youth are quite active here. They're the biggest majority. I think in the UK, the problem was that the pro-Brexiters, there was the perception that it was mostly older people scared of migration, so the youth this time reacted to that. But in our situation, I think we cannot take youth for granted. And I think they are going to really express themselves. We've already seen it from the nominations, and I think we are heading for a very interesting time.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Very much so. Yeah, my final word. I mean, just seeing some of the big heads that fell in the British election, you know, Alex Salmond and Nick Clegg, the way that they actually exited was very humbling. They congratulated the opposition. In relation to our own elections, we're all monitoring. I think the Kenyan electorate is maturing very nicely. I think the whole process is fantastic, and just listen to our leaders who are all now committed to having a transparent and free and fair election, and a peaceful one is immensely encouraging. And I wish all candidates and presidential candidates all the best.
Thank you. That is a good final word. Graham Shaw from the British Chamber of Commerce here in Kenya, as well as Professor Elijah Munyi from the United States International University. What is happening in the UK continues to develop. We continue to bring you up to speed with that. Trix Ngado will be coming in shortly to tell us what else is making headlines on the international papers. But before we get to that, let's take a short break.
We'll take you to Nigeria, where an entrepreneur is giving authors an opportunity to distribute their books without going to large publishers.